The boardroom on the 20th floor of Sterling Fashion headquarters held the kind of silence that precedes either triumph or catastrophe. 8 faces turned toward the door as it swung open, their expressions ranging from curiosity to confusion to barely concealed hostility. Victoria Sterling sat at the head of the mahogany table in her charcoal gray power suit, the sleek bob framing her face, catching the late afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Atlanta. Her fingers drummed once against the polished surface before stilling completely. The man who entered wore a navy Giorgio Armani suit that fit him like it had been born on his shoulders. Italian leather shoes clicked softly against marble as he crossed the threshold, and the platinum watch on his wrist caught the light just enough to register as expensive without screaming it. His face carried the kind of calm that comes not from ignorance, but from absolute certainty about what's coming next. Victoria's mouth opened, the word already forming, but the older black man who followed him into the room raised one hand in a gesture that somehow commanded immediate attention despite its gentleness. Benjamin Cross had spent 30 years practicing corporate law in Atlanta, and his presence in any room meant someone's world was about to change. The leather briefcase in his left hand hit the table with a sound that felt deliberate. "This is a shareholder meeting. He has every right to be here." Victoria's face flushed red, the color starting at her collarbone and climbing. "Security is removing him. He's banned from this building." Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent 5 years building a company from concept to 18 million in valuation. Someone who believed the crown she wore was hers by right of vision and sacrifice. The man in the Armani suit pulled out a chair 3 seats down from the head of the table and settled into it with the ease of someone who belonged. His eyes met Victoria's for the first time since entering, and something in that gaze made her breath catch in a way she'd never admit out loud. Benjamin Cross began distributing manila folders to each board member with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this exact dance 100 times before. The weight of expensive paper stock, the smell of fresh laser printing, the way each packet landed in front of its recipient with a soft thump that felt like a gavel falling. Meridian Holdings Investment Timeline, 2019 through 2024. Benjamin's voice carried the measured cadence of a man reading a verdict. "You'll find comprehensive documentation of all capital injections into Sterling Fashion over the past 5 years. The consultant seated to Victoria's right, Derek Hastings, leaned forward with the smooth confidence of a man who'd talked his way into and out of countless rooms just like this one. His cologne mixed with Victoria's perfume in a way that suggested familiarity beyond professional. "I'm sorry, but who exactly are you representing? Because Sterling Fashion's investor relations are handled through proper channels, not ambush meetings." Benjamin's smile held no warmth. "I represent the controlling shareholder, who, as of this moment, is exercising his legal right to call an emergency board meeting and address matters of corporate governance." Derek's hand moved to his phone under the table, fingers already composing what was probably a message to his lawyer, or maybe the buyer he'd been courting for the past 3 months. The man who'd orchestrated a 16-page merger proposal that would net him $4.5 million in finder's fees, while Victoria thought they were planning their future together. Travis Coleman, the board member who'd spent 6 weeks quietly running background checks that kept hitting walls of shell corporations and legal entities, finally found his voice. "These documents show 7 different investment vehicles. Total capital deployed is $2.9 million. He looked up, his accountant's brain already doing the math. "That's 51.3% equity at current valuation." The words landed like physical objects in the room. Victoria's hand shot out, grabbing the packet in front of her with enough force to slide it 6 inches across the table. Her eyes scanned the first page, then the second, then flipped back to the first as if hoping the numbers would change with repetition. Transaction dates she recognized, wire transfer amounts that matched exactly with the mysterious venture capital firm that had funded every major expansion over the past 5 years. The anonymous benefactor who'd believed in her vision when everyone else said sustainable fashion was a niche market with limited upside. This is impossible. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Meridian Holdings is a venture capital firm based in Delaware. They have a whole investment committee. I've signed agreements with them. There are emails. There are quarterly reports. Benjamin pulled a second document from his briefcase, this one bound with a blue backing sheet that indicated official corporate registration. Meridian Holdings, Limited Liability Company. Registered in Delaware, correct. Single member LLC. Sole owner and decision maker. He slid the document across the table until it stopped directly in front of Victoria. Her fingers traced the signature line at the bottom of the incorporation papers, the name written there in black ink. Marcus Webb. The world tilted sideways for a moment, reality bending around a center point that refused to make sense. Marcus Webb, who'd worn department store suits to every company function until she'd stopped inviting him. Marcus Webb, who'd built her entire e-commerce platform, working nights and weekends for free because he said he believed in her vision. Marcus Webb, who lived in an $800 a month apartment in Brooklyn with their 8-year-old daughter Maya and never seemed to have money for anything beyond basic necessities. Marcus Webb, who she'd slapped across the face in front of 300 of Atlanta's business elite exactly 3 months ago at the Ritz-Carlton Charity Gala. Marcus doesn't have this kind of money. The words came out automatic, a reflex against information her brain refused to process. He's a software engineer. He works contract jobs. He lives paycheck to paycheck. The man in the Armani suit spoke for the first time since entering the room, his voice carrying a quality that made everyone lean forward slightly without realizing it. I do have this money. Bitcoin investor since 2015. Current portfolio, $12 million. The early positions I took in blockchain technology returned approximately 40,000% over 8 years. Derek's face had gone the color of old newspaper. His phone clattered against the table as his grip failed. Marcus continued, each word delivered with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times, but somehow still managed to make it sound unrehearsed. Every expansion you celebrated, Victoria. Every risk you took that paid off. Every moment you stood in front of investors and media talking about your vision and your success. I funded it. From the shadows. Because I believed in what you were building. Because I loved you. Because I thought we were partners. The silence that followed carried weight. Victoria's mind raced backward through 5 years of memory, recontextualizing every interaction through this new lens. The tech conference in Atlanta where she'd presented her sustainable fashion concept to a room of skeptical investors and one software engineer in the back row had approached her afterward with ideas about AI-driven inventory management. The conversation that stretched past midnight in the hotel bar, both of them too excited about the possibilities to notice the time. The way he'd helped her build the entire back-end infrastructure for her startup, working 16-hour days alongside her while she designed and he coded. The wedding 8 months later in a small ceremony at Piedmont Park because neither of them had family in Atlanta and they didn't need a big production to validate what they felt. The first year of marriage when money was tight but they were building something together, or so she'd thought. She remembered him bringing home takeout Chinese food when she worked late, rubbing her shoulders when the stress of managing manufacturers and suppliers and endless logistics made her want to scream. She remembered thinking he was sweet but unambitious, supportive but lacking the killer instinct you needed to build something great. She remembered the moment it started to change. Dur Hastings had walked into her office 6 months ago with a portfolio of luxury brand transformations and connections throughout New York's fashion district. He talked about scaling, about positioning, about taking sterling fashion from a regional success story to a national player. He made her feel like her ambitions weren't just valid, but inevitable. Like the only thing holding her back was thinking too small. He made her feel seen in a way Marcus hadn't in years. She remembered the first time she'd dismissed Marcus's input in front of Derek, the way Derek had smiled like she'd passed some kind of test. She remembered the gradual shift in her own language, the way "we built this" became "I built this" became "I did this alone" over the course of 6 months. She remembered the late-night working sessions with Derek that weren't strictly necessary, but felt electric in a way her marriage had stopped feeling. She remembered standing in front of the Ritz-Carlton's grand ballroom 3 months ago, Derek's hand on her lower back in a way that suggested ownership, watching Marcus approach in his cheap suit, looking like he belonged at the children's table. The memory of her palm connecting with his face made her flinch now. Benjamin Cross's voice cut through her spiral. As controlling shareholder, Marcus Webb is exercising his right to assume the position of Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. Victoria, you're being offered the position of Creative Director at a salary of $120,000 annually. Your design talent is valuable. Your leadership of this company is over. Derek found his voice, though it came out strangled. This is insane. You can't just walk in here and stage a corporate coup. There are procedures. There are legal protections. Victoria built this brand from nothing. Marcus turned to face Derek for the first time, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 5 degrees. I didn't build the brand. Victoria did that. Her vision, her aesthetic, her commitment to sustainability in an industry built on waste and exploitation. That's all her. But the capital that made that vision possible, the strategic guidance that came through Meridian Holdings' quarterly reports, the financial backing that let her take risks without worrying about bankruptcy, that was me. The difference is, I never needed credit for it. Until you slapped me in front of 300 people and called me trash you picked up from the streets. Victoria's breath caught. Derek pushed back from the table, chair scraping against marble. This is clearly some kind of fraud. I'm calling my attorney. He pulled his phone out, fingers moving across the screen. Benjamin reached into his briefcase again, this time producing a document that looked significantly thicker. Before you do that, Derek, you might want to review this. He slid the packet across the table. Comprehensive documentation of $340,000 in fraudulent consulting fees you've billed Sterling Fashion over the past 6 months. The phone fell from Derek's hand for the second time. Invoice number 4782. $67,500 for New York Fashion Week consultation and supplier meetings. Your Instagram posts from that week show you in Miami at a resort. The geotag is time-stamped. Derek's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Invoice number 5831. $45,000 for supplier meetings and trend research. You don't have a passport. Verify through federal records. The color drained from Derek's face completely. Invoice number 6219. $52,800 for brand strategy consulting and market analysis. The only deliverable was a 4-page PowerPoint that plagiarized 3 articles from Business of Fashion magazine. The plagiarism detection software found 93% matching content. Marcus leaned back in his chair, the movement casual. I built Sterling Fashion's entire enterprise resource planning system. Every invoice that gets generated, every wire transfer that processes, every email sent through company servers, it all passes through infrastructure I designed and still maintain. You didn't just steal from my wife's company, Derek. You stole from mine. Victoria's hands trembled as she reached for the fraud documentation. Page after page of invoices she'd signed without reading carefully because Derek was supposed to be trustworthy, supposed to be the strategic partner who would take them to the next level. Numbers that made sense individually but looked obscene when compiled together. She'd authorized $340,000 of theft, because she'd been too busy falling for a con man to notice she was being robbed. Eleanor Brooks stood from her position at the far end of the table, her 60 years showing in the lines around her eyes, but not in the steadiness of her voice. She'd been Sterling Fashion's HR director since the company's second year of operation, back when the office was 3 people in a converted warehouse space. There's more. She looked at Derek with something that might have been pity if it weren't laced with disgust. 4 women have filed formal complaints about your behavior over the past 6 months. Sexual harassment, quid pro quo threats, hostile work environment. I documented every complaint. I notified Victoria about each one. Victoria felt the ground dissolving beneath her. Jennifer Oakes reported that you told her career advancement depended on having drinks with you outside work hours. Amanda Harris reported inappropriate comments about her body during design reviews. Vosé Foster reported that you implied her project assignments were contingent on her being more friendly. Lisa Turner reported that you cornered her in the parking garage and made explicit propositions. Eleanor's eyes moved to Victoria. You dismissed every complaint. You told Jennifer not to make waves. You told Amanda that Derek was too valuable to lose over misunderstandings. You told Rebecca that maybe she was being oversensitive. You never even responded to Lisa's complaint because it came in the same week Derek presented his expansion proposal, and you didn't want distractions. The words hit like physical blows. Marcus's voice cut through the aftermath, quieter now, but somehow more devastating for it. I gave you 5 years of unconditional support. I built the technology that runs your company. I funded every expansion without asking for recognition or credit. I raised my daughter in an $800 apartment while secretly paying for the Buckhead mansion you live in through favorable loan terms from Meridian Holdings. I worked contract coding jobs during the day so no one would question where my time went, then spent my nights managing a $12 million investment portfolio. I did all of that because I loved you and believed we were building something together. You gave me public humiliation and contempt. His hand moved to the inside pocket of his suit jacket, emerging with an envelope that he placed on the table between them. Divorce papers. Filed this morning. Georgia is a no-fault state, so I'm not seeking anything beyond separation of assets. You keep the house, Meridian Holdings owns it anyway, and I'm transferring the title. You keep your car, same situation. You get $2 million in settlement, which is generous considering everything you have came from my capital. I keep custody of Maya because she's my biological daughter, and you've spent the past 2 years treating her like an inconvenience. Victoria's vision blurred. The envelope sat between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Travis Coleman cleared his throat, his accountant's brain still processing numbers. I need to understand the timeline here. You've owned controlling interest for how long? Marcus turned to face him. Meridian Holdings made its first investment in year 1, $800,000 seed funding that let Victoria quit her day job and focus full-time on building the brand. Year 3, Series A funding of $1.2 million that funded the first retail location and expanded manufacturing. Year 5, $900,000 in growth capital that opened 3 more locations and built the current headquarters, plus 4 smaller investments through different entities, each $250,000, timed to prevent cash flow problems during seasonal fluctuations. He'd been there for everything. Every success she'd celebrated, thinking she'd done it alone, he'd made possible. The weight of that realization pressed down on Victoria's chest until breathing felt like work. Derek made a move toward the door, but Benjamin's voice stopped him. Security has been instructed not to let you leave the building until Atlanta PD arrives. They have some questions about wire fraud and embezzlement. Federal charges, given that you used electronic transfers across state lines. You're looking at 4 to 8 years. Derek's knees gave out and he caught himself on the back of his chair. I needed that money. His voice came out desperate, the smooth consultant persona cracking completely. I have debts. 2.3 million from a failed startup in 2018. The creditors were threatening legal action. This deal was supposed to save me. What deal? Victoria's voice sounded hollow. Derek's eyes darted between her and Marcus, calculation flickering behind the panic. The merger with Ashford Luxury Group. They were going to acquire Sterling Fashion for $30 million. I was getting 15% finder's fee, $4.5 million. Enough to pay off my debts and start over. Victoria felt her stomach drop. You were selling my company? Our company, Derek said, then seemed to realize that was the wrong approach. We talked about expansion, about taking Sterling Fashion national. Ashford has the infrastructure, the distribution, the capital. You would have been set for life. As a subsidiary design director with no control over your own brand. Marcus's voice carried no heat, just observation. They showed you projections and promises, while Derek showed you attention and validation. You were so hungry to be seen as more than you are that you couldn't see the con happening right in front of you. The truth of it stung worse than the slap she delivered 3 months ago. Angela Wright, the board member who'd been silent until now, found her voice. She'd built 2 startups herself before joining Sterling Fashion's board, and her instinct for corporate politics was sharp. I want to see the harassment complaints, all of them, and I want to understand how 4 separate reports resulted in 0 action. Eleanor pulled a USB drive from her jacket pocket. Everything is here. Complaints, Victoria's responses, Derek's continued presence and promotion within the company, despite documented misconduct. I'm retiring in 6 weeks. I waited because I needed my pension to vest, but I couldn't leave without making sure this was addressed. The weight of institutional failure settled over the room. Marcus stood, the movement drawing every eye. Board votes on my assumption of CEO position. All in favor? 7 hands rose. Only Victoria's stayed down. The motion passes. Derek, you're terminated for cause, effective immediately. Criminal charges are being filed. Civil suit for restitution of stolen funds will follow. Victoria, your new role begins tomorrow. HR will have paperwork ready by 9 a.m. He moved toward the door, Benjamin following, and paused with his hand on the frame. For what it's worth, you're genuinely talented. The designs you create are beautiful, and the sustainability model you built is important work. But talent without character just makes you a more effective villain. I hope you figure out the difference before you waste what's left of your career. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded final. The morning after the boardroom revelation arrived with the kind of relentless brightness that made hiding impossible. Marcus woke at 5:30 to Maya's small hand shaking his shoulder, her gap-toothed smile carrying an excitement that suggested she'd been awake for hours, waiting for permission to wake him.
Daddy, it's Thursday, Science Fair Project Day. We have to check if the crystals grew overnight.
The sugar crystal experiment they'd started 3 days ago sat on the kitchen windowsill, each jar a different color, showing how temperature and saturation affected growth rates. Maya had insisted on precise measurements and documentation, her 8-year-old mind already grasping experimental method in ways that made Marcus proud enough to ignore the early hour. They examined the jars together while eggs cooked on the stove, Maya recording observations in her spiral notebook with the careful printing of someone who understood data mattered. The red solution had produced the largest crystals, exactly as her hypothesis predicted, given its higher starting temperature. She drew careful diagrams showing crystal structure, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration.
Can we bring these to school today? I want Mrs.
Patterson to see that heating the sugar water really does make a difference. Marcus plated their breakfast, considering logistics. They're fragile, and the drive might jostle them. How about we take photographs from multiple angles instead? You can explain the methodology and show the visual evidence without risking breaking your samples. Maya's face showed brief disappointment before practical thinking took over. That's actually better, because then I can keep growing them and see how big they get over 2 weeks instead of just 3 days. She paused, syrup dripping from her fork. Daddy, are you going to work today, or are you still mad at Victoria? The question caught Marcus off guard, a reminder that children observed everything, even when adults thought they were being subtle. I'm going to work, and I'm not mad at Victoria exactly. I'm disappointed that she couldn't see what was right in front of her for 5 years. But that's a different thing than anger. Maya considered this while chewing. Is that why you're wearing the fancy suit? To show people you were always important, even when they thought you weren't? Sometimes the only way to make people listen is to speak their language. The suit helps them hear what I've been saying all along. The drive to Jefferson Elementary took them through neighborhoods where morning routines played out in variations on universal themes. Parents rushing children to bus stops. Joggers claiming sidewalks before heat made exercise miserable. Dogs being walked by people who'd rather still be sleeping. Normal life continuing, while Marcus's own life underwent tectonic shifts that hadn't yet settled into stable configuration. He walked Maya to her classroom despite her protests that she was old enough to go alone, needing the ritual of watching her settle among her friends before facing the day ahead. Mrs. Patterson caught his eye as he turned to leave, gesturing him over with the expression of an experienced teacher who had concerns to share. Maya's doing exceptionally well academically, but I've noticed some changes. She's been asking a lot of questions about why people treat others differently based on assumptions. Yesterday, she asked the class if anyone else had parents whose jobs people didn't respect. The conversation got pretty heavy for third graders. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. What did she say specifically? Mrs. Patterson consulted notes written on a sticky pad. She said her daddy has always been smart, but people thought he wasn't because of how he dressed. She asked if that was the same as judging people by their skin color or where they live. Several other kids shared similar experiences with their parents being underestimated. The fact that Maya was processing his conflict with Victoria through frameworks of dignity and respect made Marcus both proud and sad. I'll talk to her tonight. Make sure she knows it's okay to ask hard questions, but also to be a kid sometimes without carrying adult problems. Mrs. Patterson nodded with the understanding of someone who'd seen countless families navigate divorce and restructuring. She's resilient and thoughtful. Just wanted you to know she's working through things publicly rather than keeping them internalized. The drive to Sterling Fashion headquarters gave Marcus time to consider how much of his conflict with Victoria had inevitably spilled over into Maya's awareness, despite his efforts to shield her. Children observed everything, synthesized patterns adults thought they were hiding. His daughter had watched him be dismissed for years before the explosive revelation, had probably formed her own theories about worth and visibility long before the gala incident. The office buzzed with unusual energy when he arrived. Employees clustered in small groups, engaged in conversations that stopped when he passed. Eleanor found him before he made it to the elevator, her expression carrying urgency that suggested the morning's crisis had already arrived. Derek filed an emergency motion last night, claiming the board meeting was procedurally invalid. His lawyer is arguing that he was terminated without proper due process and that the embezzlement evidence was obtained illegally through unauthorized system access. Marcus felt irritation spike before control reasserted itself. We have documentation that my access rights were established when I built the infrastructure. Every login was authorized through credentials I created and maintained. What's his legal theory for how that's unauthorized? Eleanor handed him a tablet showing the legal filing. He's claiming you relinquished administrative access when Sterling Fashion hired an IT firm to manage systems maintenance 2 years ago. That you were operating as a former contractor without current authorization. The argument was technically creative and practically absurd. Marcus had never relinquished access because the IT firm had been brought in to handle routine maintenance while he maintained oversight of core architecture. But explaining that distinction in court would require revealing the full extent of his hidden involvement in company operations, which was precisely what Derek's lawyer wanted. They're trying to turn your secret investment into evidence of wrongdoing. Eleanor's analysis was sharp as always. Make you look like the villain who was secretly controlling everything while pretending to be uninvolved. It's a desperate strategy, but it might generate enough confusion to cloud the embezzlement charges. Marcus considered options while riding the elevator to his office. Benjamin Cross was already waiting when he arrived, the attorney's presence suggesting he'd anticipated this exact complication. Derek's lawyer is smart. Unethical, but smart. Benjamin settled into the chair across from Marcus's desk with the casual authority of someone who'd spent 3 decades navigating corporate litigation. He's trying to create parallel narratives. One where Derek is a legitimate consultant who got caught in a power struggle, and one where you're a shadowy manipulator who orchestrated everything for personal gain. Which narrative do we counter first? Marcus pulled up the legal filing on his computer, scanning arguments that twisted facts into shapes that barely resembled truth. We don't counter either directly. We let them commit to their theory, then dismantle it with documentation they don't know we have. Benjamin pulled folders from his briefcase with the satisfaction of someone holding winning cards. Every system access you made is logged with timestamps and purposes. Every investment decision through Meridian Holdings is documented with corporate minutes showing business rationale. Every email between you and Victoria about company operations establishes you are operating transparently within your role as investor and technical advisor. He spread documents across the desk in careful arrangement. Derek's trying to make you look secretive. We're going to show you we're hiding in plain sight the entire time, and the only reason it seemed secretive was because Victoria chose not to ask questions about who was funding her success. The strategy made sense, but required Victoria's cooperation in ways Marcus wasn't certain she'd provide. She'd have to testify that he'd been transparent about his involvement in company decisions, even if she'd been too focused on her own narrative to notice. She'd have to admit publicly that her entire success story was built on foundations she'd deliberately ignored, because acknowledging them would undermine her self-made mythology. Can we compel her testimony? Marcus asked the question knowing the answer, but needing confirmation. We shouldn't have to. Benjamin's expression suggested he'd already had conversations Marcus wasn't privy to. Victoria reached out to me yesterday, said she wanted to help however possible to make sure Derek faces consequences. I think she's realized that clearing your name is the only way to prevent him from escaping accountability. The complexity of that realization wasn't lost on Marcus. Victoria helping him required her to publicly acknowledge failures she'd spent years denying. But letting Derek manipulate the narrative would mean watching him potentially walk free while destroying Sterling Fashion's reputation in the process. She was choosing accountability over pride, which represented growth, even if it came from necessity rather than virtue. Set up the deposition. I'll provide whatever documentation they need. Marcus pulled up his encrypted files showing 5 years of investment decisions, system maintenance logs, and communications with Victoria about company direction. Every piece of evidence that proved he'd been operating with authorization and transparency, even while maintaining privacy about the source of his capital. Eleanor's phone buzzed with an incoming message that made her expression tighten. We have another problem. Jennifer Oakes just filed a formal lawsuit against Sterling Fashion for wrongful constructive discharge and hostile work environment. She's claiming Victoria's dismissal of her harassment complaint created conditions that forced her to resign. The timing was strategic and potentially devastating. One lawsuit they could handle as the isolated consequence of past mismanagement. Multiple lawsuits created patterns that suggested systemic failure rather than individual mistakes. Media coverage would shift from corporate redemption story to embattled company struggling with cultural rot. Marcus felt the weight of problems multiplying faster than solutions. What are her damages? Lost wages? Emotional distress? Career harm? She's seeking $750,000. Eleanor scrolled through the complaint on her tablet. Her lawyer is good. The documentation is comprehensive. Every email she sent to Victoria about Derek's behavior, every time Victoria told her to handle it quietly, every project she was removed from after complaining. The evidence would be damning because it was accurate. Victoria had dismissed Jennifer's concerns repeatedly and explicitly. The paper trail proved negligence at minimum, complicity at worst. Sterling Fashion's liability was clear, even if the exact dollar amount remained negotiable. Reach out to Jennifer's attorney. We're not fighting this. Marcus made the decision quickly, recognizing that some battles weren't worth fighting, even if you might win. Offer $800,000 in settlement, with a formal apology from the company and commitment to policy changes that make this impossible going forward. Make it clear we're accepting responsibility rather than trying to minimize harm. Eleanor looked surprised. That's more than she asked for. Because she deserves more than she asked for. She suffered harassment, had her complaints dismissed, and had to leave a job she was good at because we created an environment that punished victims instead of predators. Paying her fairly is the minimum we can do, while your reforms ensure it never happens again. Benjamin nodded approval. That's the right move strategically, too. Fighting would generate negative press, and discovery would force all of Victoria's worst decisions into public record. Settling quickly and generously shows we're serious about cultural change, rather than protecting past leadership. The morning had barely started, and Marcus had already made decisions that would cost the company over $1 million between legal fees and settlements. This was the price of Victoria's negligence coming due. The bill for years of treating people as disposable resources rather than human beings deserving dignity. His phone rang, showing Maya's school number, making his heart rate spike with parental fear. Mr. Webb, this is Principal Richardson. Maya's fine, but there was an incident during recess we need to discuss. The principal's office at Jefferson Elementary had the institutional beige quality of spaces designed to handle crisis without escalation. Maya sat in a chair that was slightly too large for her, swinging her legs with the residual energy of someone who'd recently been in physical conflict. A white boy around 10 years old occupied the chair next to her, a red mark on his cheek suggesting contact had been made. Principal Richardson gestured Marcus to a seat, her expression carrying the weariness of someone who dealt with children's conflicts as routine. Maya struck Tyler during recess after he made comments about your occupation. Several witnesses confirmed Tyler said your job was cleaning toilets, and that Maya should be embarrassed. Maya told him to stop, he persisted, and she slapped him. Marcus looked at his daughter, seeing his own face reflected in her defiant expression. The parallel to Victoria's gala slap was impossible to ignore and deeply uncomfortable. Maya, hitting someone isn't acceptable no matter what they say. You know this. He was lying about you. Maya's voice carried righteousness that didn't quite cover uncertainty about whether she'd done the right thing. I told him you run a company, and he said I was lying because you dressed like a janitor. He wouldn't stop laughing. Tyler's mother arrived 10 minutes later, a woman whose designer handbag and expensive highlights suggested she occupied the same social strata Victoria had before her fall. Her expression of maternal outrage shifted subtly when Principal Richardson explained Marcus was CEO of Sterling Fashion, the company that had been all over Atlanta business news for the past week. I had no idea. The apology came with visible recalculation of social positioning. Tyler, you owe Maya and her father an apology for making assumptions. Tyler mumbled something that might have been sorry while staring at his shoes. His mother's hand on his shoulder tightened in a way that suggested there would be further conversation at home. Marcus crouched to Maya's level, making eye contact that forced her to hold his gaze. What you did was wrong. I don't care what Tyler said or how mean he was being. We don't hit people because they say things that hurt our feelings or insult people we love. That's not who we are. Maya's eyes filled with tears.
But he was lying about you. And everyone was laughing, and I wanted them to know you matter.
The words broke something in Marcus's chest. I know, baby. And I appreciate you defending me. But my worth doesn't depend on Tyler or his friends believing it. Your worth doesn't depend on other people's opinions. We prove who we are through our actions, not through making other people hurt. He pulled her into a hug that she resisted for a moment before collapsing into it with the relief of a child who'd been trying to be strong. You're going to apologize to Tyler, not because what he said was okay, but because hitting him was wrong, regardless of provocation. Then we're going home for the rest of the day and talking about better ways to handle people who try to make us feel small. The drive home was silent, except for Maya's occasional sniffles from the passenger seat. Marcus's mind raced through implications and parallels, seeing his own conflict with Victoria playing out in third-grade dynamics. His daughter had learned from somewhere that physical violence was an acceptable response to public humiliation. The fact that she'd learned it from watching Victoria slap him made the whole situation feel like karmic recursion. At the apartment, he made hot chocolate despite the afternoon heat because comfort rituals mattered more than logic. They sat at the kitchen table with Maya's untouched cup between them, the silence heavy with things that needed saying. I'm scared. Maya's voice came out small. Scared that people will always think you're not important because you don't show off? Scared that I'll have to keep defending you forever? Scared that Tyler's right and everyone else is just too polite to say it? Marcus felt his daughter's fear like a physical weight. Those fears are real, baby. People do judge based on appearance and assumptions. They do underestimate quiet people who don't perform wealth or status. But here's what I need you to understand. Their judgment doesn't change who I am or what I've built. I spent 5 years funding a multi-million-dollar company while living in this apartment because I valued substance over appearance. He gestured around their modest living space. This apartment doesn't make me less successful. My bank account doesn't determine my worth as a person or a father. The respect of people who judge based on surfaces doesn't matter, because their opinion is built on things that aren't real. What matters is that I know who I am, you know who I am, and the people whose respect I actually value see me clearly. But Victoria didn't see you. Maya's observation cut through pretense with the brutal honesty only children could deliver. She thought you weren't important, and she was married to you. How am I supposed to believe people will see you if even your wife couldn't? The question hung between them, requiring an answer Marcus wasn't sure he had. Victoria couldn't see me because she'd built her identity around being self-made. Acknowledging what I contributed would mean admitting she wasn't self-sufficient, and her ego couldn't handle that truth. So she chose blindness over honesty, comfort over growth. He reached across the table to take Maya's hand, but that was her choice, not my failure. I showed up every day, I contributed meaningfully, I loved her and supported her vision. The fact that she couldn't see or value those things says everything about her and nothing about me. Maya absorbed this slowly, her 8-year-old mind working through adult complexities. So when Tyler said you weren't important, that was his choice to be blind too? Exactly. And your job isn't to make him see better by hitting him. Your job is to know the truth clearly enough that his blindness doesn't make you doubt it. That's what being bigger than the sky means, baby. Being so secure in who you are that other people's limitations can't pull you down. The catchphrase landed with the weight Marcus intended, planting seeds he'd cultivate over the coming months and years. Maya's expression shifted from fear to contemplation, her brilliant mind already working through the implications. They finished their hot chocolate in companionable silence, the crisis diffused, if not completely resolved. Marcus's phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from Eleanor about settlement negotiations, and from Benjamin about Derek's legal maneuvering, but he ignored them all in favor of being present with his daughter, who'd just learned a hard lesson about dignity and violence. Later that evening, after Maya had completed homework and started reading her biography of Katherine Johnson, Marcus returned to the accumulated work crises. Eleanor's messages showed that Jennifer's attorney had accepted the settlement offer with surprising speed, suggesting the amount was indeed generous enough to feel like genuine accountability rather than corporate damage control. Benjamin's updates were less encouraging. Derek's lawyer had filed additional motions claiming Marcus's takeover constituted breach of fiduciary duty to minority shareholders and that the board vote was invalid because several members had conflicts of interest. The legal strategy was transparently desperate, throwing every possible argument at the wall to see what might stick long enough to create reasonable doubt about the embezzlement charges. Marcus spent 2 hours on a conference call with Benjamin and Sterling Fashion's corporate attorneys, walking through documentation that would systematically dismantle each of Derek's claims. The board vote had been properly noticed and conducted according to bylaws. His ownership stake was documented through years of legal filings. His system access was authorized by credentials he'd created when building the infrastructure. Every argument Derek's lawyer made crumbled under scrutiny, but the process of proving it would be expensive and time-consuming. Litigation designed not to win, but to punish through attrition. We should consider offering Derek a deal. Benjamin's suggestion came after they'd exhausted discussion of defensive strategies. Drop the emergency motions, plead guilty to embezzlement, serve his time. In exchange, we don't pursue civil damages beyond restitution, and we don't cooperate with federal prosecutors looking at the broader merger scheme. The idea of letting Derek escape fuller consequences made Marcus's jaw clench. He tried to steal $340,000 and destroy Victoria's company for personal gain. Why would we make his situation easier? Because destroying him completely satisfies anger, but doesn't serve business interests. Benjamin's pragmatism was infuriating and correct. Every day we spend fighting his motions is a day we're not growing Sterling Fashion. Every headline about litigation is a headline that's not about our sustainable practices or ethical manufacturing. He's already going to prison. The question is whether we want to spend the next year making sure he goes for slightly longer, or whether we want to move forward. Marcus thought about Maya's science fair project and Eleanor's policy reforms, and the choice between revenge and building something better. Thought about whether proving Derek was thoroughly destroyed mattered more than protecting the company from prolonged damage. Make the offer. If he rejects it, we pursue every possible consequence with maximum aggression, but give him the chance to accept accountability and minimize harm. Benjamin ended the call with promises to reach out to Derek's attorney in the morning. Marcus sat in the quiet of his living room, listening to Maya's soft breathing from her bedroom and the ambient sounds of an apartment building settling into night. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Heard about Maya's incident. Is she okay? I remember feeling that kind of protective fury. It doesn't make it right, but I understand where it came from. The message felt like an olive branch extended across the wreckage of their marriage. Marcus considered his response carefully before typing. She's working through it, learning that violence doesn't solve problems even when the problems are real. Probably a lesson we all need at various points. 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before Victoria's response came through. I've been thinking about the gala a lot lately, about how I thought humiliating you would make me feel powerful, but really it just showed everyone who I'd become. Maya defended you out of love. I attacked you out of contempt. The difference matters. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment before responding. The difference does matter. I appreciate you recognizing that. Benjamin said you're settling with Jennifer, that you offered more than she asked for. It's the right thing to do. She deserved better than what Sterling Fashion provided under previous leadership. The implication that Victoria's leadership had been the problem hung unspoken but clear. The three dots appeared again, disappeared, reappeared. I want to personally apologize to her. Not through lawyers or official statements, just me acknowledging what I did and that she deserved better. Would that be appropriate, or would it complicate the settlement? Marcus consulted his instinct against the legal caution Benjamin would advocate. Ask her attorney first. If Jennifer wants to hear it, then yes. If she doesn't, respect that boundary. Apologies are for the benefit of the person harmed, not the person seeking absolution. When did you get so wise? I was always this wise. You just couldn't see it because you were too busy looking for validation in mirrors that reflected what you wanted to believe rather than what was real. The response was harsher than he'd intended, but not harsh enough to take back. Victoria deserved honesty more than she deserved comfort. The three dots appeared and disappeared one final time before her last message arrived. You're right. I'm trying to look in better mirrors now. Good night, Marcus. He set the phone down and moved through the apartment's nighttime routine, checking locks, turning off lights, making sure Maya's backpack was ready for tomorrow. The rhythms of single parenting that had been his reality for years, even when he was technically married, because Victoria had stopped being present long before she'd become actively hostile. The week that followed brought resolution faster than Marcus had anticipated. Derek's attorney contacted Benjamin on Wednesday morning with acceptance of the plea deal. Derek apparently recognizing that his legal position was untenable, and further fighting would only add years to his sentence. By Friday afternoon, Derek had formally entered guilty pleas to all charges, with sentencing scheduled for 6 weeks out. Jennifer's attorney reached out on Thursday with a request that surprised everyone. Jennifer wanted to meet with Victoria face-to-face, but only with Marcus present as a witness. She didn't trust Victoria not to manipulate the narrative, even in an apology, and Marcus's presence would ensure the conversation stayed honest and documented. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 3 p.m. in Sterling Fashion's main conference room. Marcus arrived early to find Jennifer already seated, her attorney beside her, and a recording device on the table, indicating this conversation would be preserved for potential future use. She looked older than her 28 years, carrying the kind of weariness that came from fighting battles that shouldn't have been necessary. Victoria arrived exactly at 3, her punctuality suggesting nervousness disguised as professionalism. She wore a simple dress instead of her usual power suits, and her hair fell loose around her shoulders in a style that made her look younger and less armored. She took the seat across from Jennifer, her hands folded on the table in a posture that read as both submissive and uncertain. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Victoria's voice carried none of the confident authority she'd wielded as CEO, replaced by something that sounded almost fragile. I know an apology doesn't undo the harm I caused or fix the career damage you suffered, but I wanted to say directly that I was wrong. Comprehensively, inexcusably wrong. Jennifer's expression remained neutral, giving nothing away. You dismissed 4 separate complaints I filed about Derek's behavior. You told me I was being oversensitive. You removed me from projects when I persisted in reporting. Why? The question demanded honesty that would be painful to deliver. Victoria took a breath that seemed to steady her before responding. Because dealing with your complaints meant acknowledging I'd made a mistake in hiring Derek. Because his strategic advice made me feel important in a way I'd been craving. Because I valued my own comfort and ambition over your safety and dignity. Her hands twisted together, the only visible sign of distress beyond her voice. I told myself you were exaggerating because believing you would require me to act, and acting would disrupt the illusion that I was building something perfect. I chose my ego over your well-being repeatedly and deliberately. There's no version of that where I'm not the villain. Jennifer's attorney made notes while Jennifer herself remained motionless. What changed? Why are you apologizing now instead of a year ago when I first complained? Victoria's pause stretched long enough to be uncomfortable.
Because Marcus took away my power and forced me to see the consequences of my choices. Because losing everything made me realize I've been valuing all the wrong things. Because I finally had to confront that the person I'd become was someone I would have hated if I'd met her 5 years ago. She met Jennifer's eyes directly.
I can't undo what happened. I can't give you back the year of career growth you lost, or the emotional toll of not being believed. What I can do is make sure Sterling Fashion becomes the kind of place where complaints get heard and investigated properly, where people's dignity matters more than anyone's comfort, where what happened to you becomes impossible because the systems prevent it. Jennifer's expression finally shifted, revealing something that might have been satisfaction at hearing accountability spoken clearly. The settlement we've agreed to includes policy changes and oversight mechanisms. I want your personal commitment that you'll support those changes even when they're inconvenient, even when they affect people you value, even when they cost the company money or opportunities. You have it. Victoria's voice strengthened. I'm working with Eleanor Brooks on the implementation. I'll do quarterly check-ins to make sure the systems are functioning as intended. If you ever hear that Sterling Fashion is backsliding, you contact me directly, and I'll address it. Jennifer nodded once, a gesture that felt like acceptance, if not forgiveness. The apology is noted. The commitment is documented. We'll see over time if the actions match the words. She stood, her attorney gathering materials with practiced efficiency. Thank you for being here, Mr. Webb. Having a witness ensures this conversation stays honest. After they left, Victoria remained seated, staring at her hands like they belonged to a stranger.
That was harder than I expected.
Good. Marcus's response came without sympathy. Apologizing should be hard when you've caused real damage. Easy apologies for serious harm just mean you haven't actually confronted what you did. Victoria looked up, her eyes carrying a vulnerability he hadn't seen in years. Do you think I can actually change? Become someone who builds things ethically instead of stepping on people to get what I want? The question demanded honesty, even when honesty was unkind. I think you're capable of change, if you're willing to stay uncomfortable long enough to let it happen. Most people retreat back to comfortable patterns when growth gets difficult. Whether you're different remains to be proven through sustained action rather than temporary remorse. He stood, preparing to return to work that actually mattered. The fact that you're asking the question suggests you're at least aware of the problem. Awareness is necessary, but not sufficient. Prove it through choices you make every day for the next year, then ask me again. 3 months after the boardroom revelation, Marcus stood in the same federal courthouse where Derek Hastings was about to learn exactly how expensive his mistakes would be. The building had the austere dignity of a space designed to remind everyone who entered that justice operated on a scale larger than individual grievances. Derek sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit that transformed him from smooth consultant to common criminal with brutal efficiency. The jury had deliberated for 4 hours before returning with a verdict that surprised no one who'd seen the evidence. Guilty on all counts. Wire fraud, embezzlement, theft by deception. Each charge carrying a mandatory minimum that stacked like building blocks toward a future measured in years behind bars. Maya sat beside Marcus in the gallery, insisting on coming despite his attempts to shield her from the ugliness. Her hand found his as the judge began speaking, small fingers squeezing once in a gesture that said she understood more than an 8-year-old probably should. The defendant is sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years supervised release. Restitution in the amount of $340,000 to be paid to Sterling Fashion Incorporated. The judge's gavel fell with finality. Court is adjourned. Derek's shoulders sagged as marshals moved forward to escort him from the courtroom. His eyes found Marcus for a moment, carrying something that might have been regret if it weren't buried under layers of self-pity and resentment. The look of a man who'd gambled everything on a con and lost. Maya's voice came out small but steady. He looks sad. Marcus considered how to respond, weighing honesty against age-appropriate context. Sometimes people make choices that hurt others because they're desperate or scared. That doesn't make the choices right, but it does make them human. Derek will have 4 years to think about the person he wants to be when he gets out. Outside the courthouse, Benjamin Cross fielded questions from reporters while Marcus guided Maya toward his car. The media had been circling Sterling Fashion's transformation for 3 months now, hungry for details about the mysterious crypto investor who'd emerged from nowhere to take control of an $18 million company. Marcus had given exactly 2 interviews, both focused on sustainable fashion practices rather than personal drama. The drive back to the office took 20 minutes through midday traffic. Maya spent the time reading a library book about Marie Curie, occasionally looking up to comment on something she found interesting. Her science fair project on economic mobility had won first place 2 weeks ago, leading to a local news segment that Marcus had carefully edited to minimize his own presence while highlighting Maya's research. Sterling Fashion's headquarters looked different now, the same glass and steel structure, but something in the energy had shifted. Employees who'd previously avoided eye contact now nodded greetings as Marcus and Maya crossed the lobby. The culture of fear and favoritism that had festered under Derek's influence was slowly being replaced by something resembling actual professionalism. Eleanor Brooks met them at the elevator, her new title of Vice President of Ethics and Compliance giving her authority to implement the systems she'd dreamed about for years. "We have final approval on the third-party review board." She handed Marcus a tablet showing the roster. 3 employment attorneys, 2 HR professionals, and a retired federal judge. All vetted, all independent, all committed to making sure complaints get handled properly. Marcus scanned the names, recognizing 2 from his research into corporate accountability structures. This is solid work. "When can we announce?" "Tomorrow." Eleanor's satisfaction was evident. Along with the revised handbook and mandatory training for all managers, we're also implementing quarterly anonymous surveys so employees can flag concerns before they become formal complaints. Maya looked up from her book. "What's a formal complaint?" Eleanor crouched to Maya's level, her grandmother instincts kicking in. "It's when someone at work is being treated badly and they need help fixing it. We're making sure there are people whose only job is listening and helping, not making excuses or ignoring problems." "Like whistleblowers?" Maya's eyes brightened. "We learned about them in social studies. People who tell the truth even when it's hard. Exactly like that." Eleanor straightened, meeting Marcus's gaze over Maya's head with an expression that suggested she approved of how he was raising his daughter. "Some of the most important work in any organization comes from people brave enough to speak up." The elevator arrived, and they rode to the 20th floor in comfortable silence. Marcus's office occupied the corner suite that had been Victoria's until 3 months ago. He'd kept her aesthetic mostly intact, adding only a framed photograph of Maya on his desk, and replacing the art with works from local Atlanta artists who focused on social justice themes. Maya settled into the reading corner Marcus had created specifically for her visits, spreading out homework while he turned his attention to the afternoon's agenda. A conference call with sustainable textile suppliers in North Carolina. Review of Q1 financial projections, showing 23% revenue growth. Final approval on the employee profit-sharing program that would distribute 15% of annual profits to everyone on staff based on tenure and performance. The call with textile suppliers went longer than scheduled, diving deep into innovations in recycled polyester and organic cotton sourcing. Marcus found himself genuinely engaged with the technical challenges, his engineering background giving him frameworks for solving supply chain problems that pure business training might have missed. When he finally hung up, Maya had finished her homework and moved on to sketching fashion designs in a notebook Victoria had given her months ago. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus, his daughter learning design principles from the woman who'd called him trash, finding value in Victoria's genuine talent even as the relationship between adults remained fractured. "Can I show these to Victoria at dinner?" Maya held up her notebook, revealing surprisingly sophisticated drawings for an 8-year-old. She said she'd give me feedback if I kept practicing. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. The dinner arrangement had been Maya's idea, insisting that just because adults got divorced didn't mean she had to lose her stepmother completely. Victoria had agreed, with an eagerness that suggested she was desperate for any connection to the family she'd destroyed. They'd been meeting weekly for the past 6 weeks, neutral restaurants where Maya could maintain relationships while Marcus maintained boundaries. The conversations were carefully polite, focused entirely on Maya's interests and achievements. Victoria asked about school and science projects. Marcus asked about design work and industry developments. Neither of them mentioned the gala or the boardroom or the 5 years of marriage that had crumbled under the weight of contempt and betrayal. "Sure, baby. I'm sure she'd love to see what you're working on." Marcus checked his watch. "We should probably head out soon. Reservations at 6. The restaurant Victoria had chosen was a farm-to-table place in Virginia Highland, the kind of establishment that prioritized local ingredients and ethical sourcing. Walking in, Marcus couldn't help noticing it was exactly the type of venue she would have refused to be seen at with him 6 months ago, when she'd been busy chasing prestige over principles. Victoria was already seated when they arrived, wearing a simple dress that suggested she'd stopped trying to perform wealth at every opportunity. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders instead of styled into the severe bob that had become her signature. She looked younger somehow, or maybe just more honest. Maya launched into an enthusiastic explanation of her latest science experiment before they'd even fully settled into their seats, pulling out her notebook to show the fashion sketches. Victoria leaned forward with genuine interest, pointing out techniques for capturing fabric drape and suggesting ways to indicate texture through cross-hatching. "This line here, see how it curves? That's showing how silk moves differently than cotton. Your instinct is good, you just need to commit to it more." Victoria's finger traced the drawing, her designer's eye translating technical knowledge into language an 8-year-old could grasp. Marcus watched the interaction from behind his menu, seeing the version of Victoria that had made him fall in love 5 years ago. The woman who could make complex ideas accessible. The woman who genuinely cared about nurturing talent. The woman who'd somehow gotten buried under ambition and ego until she'd needed to lose everything to find herself again. Their food arrived, and conversation shifted to safer topics. Maya's upcoming field trip to the Georgia Aquarium. A new shipment of sustainable bamboo fabric Sterling Fashion was testing. The community garden project Maya's school was launching that Victoria had volunteered to help fund through a corporate sustainability grant. It was all very civilized and careful. 2 adults performing courtesy for a child's benefit while avoiding the landmines of everything left unsaid. Then Maya excused herself to the restroom, and the careful performance cracked. Victoria's hands twisted her napkin into sculptural shapes, her eyes tracking patterns in the tablecloth. "I've been working on something I wanted to run by you. A new collection focused on formerly incarcerated women re-entering the workforce." Marcus waited, letting the silence stretch until she continued. "Clothes that are professional enough for interviews, but affordable on limited budgets, made by women who have similar backgrounds, providing training and fair wages to people the industry typically excludes." Victoria pulled out her phone, showing him preliminary sketches. "I thought about Derek serving 4 years, about whether he'll be able to find work after, about how many people get written off because of mistakes and never get the chance to prove they're more than the worst thing they did." The concept was genuinely good, both from a design perspective and a social impact angle. Marcus found himself impressed, despite everything. This could work. Would need partnership with re-entry programs and probably grants to keep prices accessible, but the model is sound. Victoria's smile flickered uncertainly. Would Sterling Fashion consider it? Or is that asking too much? Sterling Fashion would absolutely consider it, subject to the normal vetting for any new line. Send me a formal proposal through Eleanor. Include cost projections, partnership requirements, and marketing strategy. If the numbers work and the social impact is genuine, we'll greenlight it. Maya returned from the restroom, sliding back into her seat with the unconscious ease of a child who assumed adults would sort themselves out. Victoria straightened her spine, gathering the shredded napkin and setting it aside like she was physically putting aside the emotional rawness. The rest of dinner passed with determinedly cheerful conversation about Maya's summer reading list and whether dolphins or sharks were cooler. They split the check despite Marcus's offer to cover it, Victoria insisting on maintaining whatever small independence she could claim. Walking Maya to the car afterward, Marcus felt his daughter's hand slip into his. Is Victoria sad? The question carried layers of perception that reminded Marcus his daughter was always paying attention, even when she seemed focused elsewhere. Yeah, baby, I think she's sad about a lot of things. But sadness can be useful if it helps you figure out how to do better. Do you think she will? Do better, I mean? Marcus thought about the woman who'd slapped him in public and the woman who'd just spent an hour genuinely engaged with an 8-year-old's fashion sketches. I think she's trying. Whether trying becomes succeeding depends on choices she makes every day from here forward. Maya processed this with the seriousness of someone learning life lessons in real time. I hope she does. I like her designs. The simplicity of childhood priorities made Marcus smile despite everything. Me too, baby. Me too. 6 months after the boardroom revelation, Sterling Fashion had transformed into something Marcus barely recognized, despite being the architect of its current success. Revenue was up 23% year over year. Employee satisfaction surveys showed dramatic improvements across every metric. Media coverage focused on sustainability practices and ethical manufacturing instead of corporate drama. The company Victoria had envisioned was finally becoming real now that someone with actual business acumen was running operations, while her creative talent focused where it belonged. Victoria's re-entry program had launched to unexpected acclaim, featured in 3 national publications as an example of how fashion could create social value beyond profit. The first cohort of 12 women had completed their training and were now producing pieces that sold out within days of hitting the website. Victoria worked directly with each participant, her design expertise helping them translate their experiences into aesthetic choices that resonated with customers looking for meaning in their purchases. Marcus had approved a budget expansion that would double the program's capacity within 6 months, recognizing that the social impact justified the modest profit margins. This was the kind of work Sterling Fashion should be doing, using commercial success to create opportunities for people the industry typically discarded. Eleanor's systems were catching problems before they metastasized. The anonymous reporting portal had logged 47 concerns in its first month, ranging from minor scheduling conflicts to serious allegations of discrimination. Every single concern received response within 72 hours. Every serious allegation got investigated by the Independent Review Board. The culture was changing, slowly but measurably. The transformation hadn't gone unnoticed. Marcus received weekly inquiries from business journalists wanting to profile the mysterious crypto investor who'd emerged from nowhere to revolutionize sustainable fashion. He declined most interviews, accepting only those that focused on industry practices rather than personal narrative. His goal wasn't celebrity, but competence, proving that ethical business could compete with exploitative models if leadership prioritized the right values. Maya's 9th birthday arrived on a Saturday in late October, celebrated with a party at their apartment that brought together her school friends and a few carefully selected adults. Victoria attended at Maya's insistence, bringing a gift that showed she'd been paying attention to Maya's current obsessions, a subscription to a monthly science kit that would deliver experiments and educational materials tailored to her advancing skills. Marcus watched Victoria interact with the other parents, seeing her navigate social dynamics with a humility that would have been impossible 6 months ago. She introduced herself as Sterling Fashion's creative director without mentioning she'd founded the company, accepting compliments about the brand's sustainability work without claiming sole credit for its vision. Growth looked different on different people. For Victoria, it meant learning to occupy space without demanding to be the center of it. After the party wound down and the last guests departed, Maya sprawled on the couch, surrounded by gift wrap and new books, her face carrying the satisfied exhaustion of someone who'd been properly celebrated. Victoria lingered while helping clean up, her movements careful, like she was afraid of overstaying welcome.
Thank you for letting me be here.
Victoria's voice came out soft as she collected paper plates into a trash bag.
I know it's more than I deserve, given how things ended.
Marcus considered his response while loading dishwasher, weighing honesty against unnecessary cruelty. Maya wanted you here. That's what matters. She loves you despite your flaws, and I'm not going to punish her for that by making you a stranger. Victoria's hands stilled on the trash bag. I've been thinking about what you said, about proving change through sustained action rather than temporary remorse. It's been 6 months. Do you see any difference? The question demanded honesty. Marcus dried his hands on a dish towel, turning to face her directly. I see someone trying. Someone showing up for meetings even when they're uncomfortable. Someone supporting reforms that limit your own authority. Someone creating opportunities for people you might have dismissed a year ago. Whether that trying has become genuine transformation, or whether it's just performance that will revert when the spotlight moves, that remains to be seen. He softened slightly, recognizing that growth deserved acknowledgement even when it remained incomplete. But yes, Victoria, I see difference. The question is whether you can sustain it when the incentives change. When you're successful enough again that ego becomes tempting, when someone offers you power that requires compromising the principles you're claiming now. Victoria absorbed this, her expression showing the kind of thoughtful processing that suggested she was actually hearing rather than just waiting to respond. I think about that a lot, about whether I've actually changed or whether I'm just performing contrition because the alternative is worse. I don't know the answer yet, but I'm trying to make choices that will reveal the truth over time rather than just in crisis moments. That's probably the most honest thing you've said to me in years. Marcus hung the dish towel on its hook. Keep doing that. Keep choosing uncomfortable honesty over comfortable performance. Eventually, the pattern will prove which version of yourself is real. Maya called from the living room, asking if they could watch a movie, and Victoria took it as her cue to leave. She hugged Maya goodbye with obvious affection, then paused at the apartment door. Marcus, thank you for giving me the chance to try being better, even though you didn't have to. Even though I don't deserve it. He turned back, meeting her eyes across the small space. You're right. You don't deserve it. But Maya deserves to see that people can grow. And maybe I deserve to believe that love doesn't have to end in bitterness, even when relationships do. The door closed behind her with a soft click that felt less final than it had 6 months ago, less like an ending and more like a different kind of beginning. 1 year after the gala that had changed everything, the Ritz-Carlton Atlanta hosted another charity event in the same grand ballroom where Victoria had slapped Marcus in front of 300 witnesses. The irony of returning to the scene wasn't lost on anyone involved, but Marcus had accepted the invitation to give the keynote address because the cause mattered, and because running from symbolism gave it more power than it deserved. The ballroom glittered with the same crystal chandeliers and the same crowd of Atlanta's business elite, many of whom had witnessed his humiliation 12 months ago. But the energy was different now. People who'd looked through him a year ago now greeted him with genuine respect. The CEO of Sterling Fashion commanded attention that the dismissed husband never had. Maya sat in the front row, wearing a dress she'd helped Victoria design, the collaboration between them producing something that balanced sophistication with age-appropriate whimsy. She gave Marcus a thumbs up as he approached the podium, her gap-toothed grin visible even from stage. Victoria sat 3 rows back, intentionally positioning herself where her presence would be noted, but not dominant. She'd helped organize the event through Sterling Fashion's charitable foundation, using her design connections to secure auction items that would fund scholarships for underprivileged students pursuing careers in sustainable industries. Marcus adjusted the microphone and let silence settle before beginning. A year ago, I stood in this room as someone most of you didn't see. I wasn't on stage. I wasn't giving speeches. I was just another person in a cheap suit who seemed to belong at the margins rather than the center of important conversations. The audience shifted, recognizing the reference to what had happened. What you didn't know, what I'd chosen to hide, was that I'd been funding the success you were celebrating, building infrastructure you relied on, making possible the achievements others claimed as solely their own. I hid because I wanted to be chosen for who I was, rather than what I had. I wanted authenticity in a world that too often confuses performance with substance. He paused, letting the weight of that land. I learned a hard lesson that year, that hiding your truth in service of testing others often just means everyone operates from false assumptions. That authentic relationships require authentic presentation, even when that presentation feels risky. That love built on incomplete information, no matter how well-intentioned the omission, is still love built on sand. Victoria's face was visible in the crowd, her expression showing the kind of raw vulnerability that came from hearing your failures acknowledged publicly, but without cruelty. But I also learned something more important, that your worth doesn't depend on other people's ability to see it. That dignity isn't something others grant through recognition, but something you maintain through integrity. That being underestimated by people who judge based on surfaces just means those people have limited vision, not that you have limited value. Maya was crying now, tears streaming down her face while she smiled. Marcus felt his own throat tighten, but pushed through. This past year, Sterling Fashion has grown not because we're chasing trends or maximizing short-term profits, but because we're building something that lasts. We're creating opportunities for people the industry typically excludes. We're proving that ethical practices can compete with exploitative models. We're showing that success measured by positive impact is more sustainable than success measured by personal acclaim. His eyes found Victoria in the crowd. None of that would be possible without the creative vision that founded this company, without the design talent that makes sustainability beautiful rather than merely virtuous, without the commitment to excellence that demands we do things right even when doing them quickly would be easier. He shifted his gaze to the broader audience. But vision without execution is just dreaming. Talent without integrity is just potential for harm. Excellence without ethics is just another path to destruction. The measure of any organization, any relationship, any life well lived is found in how you wield whatever power you've been given, whether you use it to elevate others or to elevate yourself, whether you see people's dignity as worth protecting or just as obstacles to navigate around. The speech continued for another 10 minutes, covering Sterling Fashion's specific initiatives and the broader industry trends toward sustainability. But the emotional core had been delivered. The thesis stated clearly enough that even those who'd witnessed his humiliation a year ago could understand the transformation that had occurred. When he finished, the standing ovation lasted longer than his speech. Maya rushed the stage as soon as protocol allowed, throwing her arms around him with the fierce love of someone who'd watched her father prove his worth to people who should have seen it all along.
You were bigger than the sky, Daddy.
She whispered it into his shoulder while cameras flashed and people pressed forward to congratulate him.
So much bigger than they could see.
The phrase landed with all the weight he'd intended when he'd first planted it a year ago. A reminder that their measure of success had always been internal rather than external. That the opinions of people who judged based on surfaces mattered less than the foundation they'd built together through honesty and mutual respect. Victoria approached as the crowd thinned, her eyes red but her smile genuine. That was perfect. Everything you said about vision needing execution, about talent needing integrity. Thank you for acknowledging what I contributed while holding me accountable for what I destroyed. Marcus gestured to a quieter corner of the ballroom. How's the re-entry program going? Beyond expectations. We're expanding to 4 more cities next quarter. The women we're training are producing work that's getting attention from buyers who care about both quality and social impact. Victoria's animation when discussing the program showed passion he hadn't seen in years. One of our first cohort participants just got hired as a full-time designer at a major brand. She credits the program with giving her the skills and confidence to believe she could compete. That's the kind of success that actually matters. Marcus watched Maya dancing with other children across the ballroom, her joy uncomplicated by the adult complexities swirling around her. Not the revenue numbers or the media coverage, but the individual lives changed for the better. I know. Victoria followed his gaze to Maya. I'm trying to build a life that prioritizes that kind of success. It's harder than I expected. Every day I have to choose between doing what feels comfortable and doing what's actually right. But I'm making the choice more consistently than I used to. Keep making it. Eventually it stops being a choice and starts being who you are. They stood in companionable silence while the event wound down. 2 people who'd loved and hurt each other, finding a tentative peace that acknowledged both the damage and the potential for something different going forward. Not reconciliation, but not bitterness either. Just honest recognition of what had been, what was, and what might yet become if both of them kept choosing growth over comfort. The drive home took Marcus and Maya through Atlanta's nighttime streets, the city lights painting patterns across windows, while Maya narrated her perspective on the evening. She'd made friends with the daughter of one of the auction organizers. She'd tried 3 different kinds of fancy dessert. She'd watched her father command the respect of people who'd once looked through him like he was invisible. Are you happy, Daddy? The question came as they pulled into their apartment complex, Maya's voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than concern. Like, really happy? Not just okay, but actually good? Marcus considered his answer while turning off the engine. I'm content, baby. Content with the work I'm doing, with the life we've built, with the choices I've made even when they were hard. Happy feels like something lighter than what I'm experiencing. This feels more solid. Like I've built something that can weather storms because it's founded on truth rather than illusion. Is that better than happy? Maya unbuckled her seatbelt, gathering the small purse Victoria had made her. Different. Not better or worse, just different. Happy is nice when it happens, but content is what you build a life on. They made their way upstairs to the apartment that still cost $800 a month, despite Marcus's ability to afford much more. The choice to stay was deliberate, a reminder that comfort measured by square footage mattered less than stability, measured by familiar rhythms and community connections. Maya had friends in this building. Their neighbors knew their routines. The local school was within walking distance. Upgrading for the sake of appearance would have been exactly the kind of ego-driven choice Victoria would make, and Marcus was determined to model something different for his daughter. After Maya went to bed, Marcus stood at the kitchen window, looking out over Brooklyn's nighttime landscape. Lights in other apartments, showing lives being lived in infinite variation. Somewhere out there, Victoria was probably reviewing designs or meeting with program participants or doing the work of becoming someone better than she'd been. Somewhere Derek was settling into his second year of federal prison, learning what consequences felt like when you couldn't charm your way around them. Somewhere Jennifer and the other women who'd filed complaints were building careers that had survived despite attempts to destroy them. And here, in this modest apartment with his daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room, Marcus Webb had created something that mattered more than any of it. Not revenge, not vindication, not even justice in the traditional sense. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing his worth had never depended on other people's ability to see it. Of building a company that reflected his values. Of raising a daughter who understood that being bigger than the sky meant maintaining your integrity when the world tried to make you smaller. His phone buzzed with an email from Eleanor showing preliminary Q4 numbers. Revenue up 26%. Employee retention at 98%. Customer satisfaction scores climbing steadily. 3 more industry awards for sustainability practices. 2 invitations to speak at conferences about ethical manufacturing. The metrics told a story of fundamentals mattering more than flash, of sustainable practices yielding sustainable growth. Marcus felt satisfaction that went beyond financial success into something resembling the vindication of a business philosophy he'd always believed in, but had never before had the authority to implement fully. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. A meeting with potential investors in the re-entry program expansion. Review of Victoria's proposal for a climate-focused collection. Strategic planning for the next fiscal year. The regular rhythm of running a company that was actually functioning instead of lurching from crisis to crisis. But tonight, in this moment, Marcus stood at his kitchen window and felt something close to peace. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and Maya's soft breathing from her bedroom. Outside, Atlanta continued its restless energy. Millions of stories intersecting and diverging in patterns impossible to predict or control. He thought about the tech conference 5 years ago where everything had started, about the conversation that had stretched past midnight because neither of them wanted it to end, about the vision they'd shared for building something meaningful in an industry built on exploitation, about the moment when shared dreams had curdled into contempt because one person needed credit more than partnership. He thought about Maya defending him on the playground and Victoria apologizing to Jennifer and Derek accepting consequences in a federal courtroom, about Eleanor implementing systems and Travis Coleman asking hard questions, and Benjamin Cross building legal frameworks that protected what mattered. He thought about all the choices that had led to this moment, the good and bad decisions that had shaped not just his own trajectory, but the lives of everyone whose path had intersected his. And he thought about tomorrow, about the ongoing work of building something that would outlast any individual contribution, about teaching Maya through example rather than lecture, about proving that worth demonstrated through actions mattered more than worth proclaimed through words. The kitchen clock showed past midnight. The day officially ended, and a new one beginning. Marcus moved through the apartment, turning off lights, the ritual of closing one chapter and preparing for the next. He checked on Maya one last time, finding her sprawled across her bed with mathematical confidence, her latest biography of a female scientist bookmarking a page about halfway through. His daughter, who asked questions about orbital mechanics and designed fashion sketches, and believed her father had always been worthy of respect because she'd never learned otherwise. Who knew that being bigger than the sky meant maintaining your truth regardless of who could see it? Who was growing up with examples of both failure and redemption, learning that people were complex and that growth was always possible if you were willing to do the work. That inheritance mattered more than any financial portfolio or business success, more than the company he'd built, or the revenge he'd declined, or the mercy he'd extended to people who hadn't earned it. Maya would grow up knowing that worth came from character rather than performance, from integrity rather than acclaim, from building rather than taking. She'd inherit a world that often valued the opposite, but at least she'd have a foundation for recognizing the difference. Marcus fell asleep thinking about second chances and sustained effort,
and the strange ways people's lives intersected and diverged. Thinking about Victoria's sketches and Eleanor's reforms, and the quiet satisfaction of running a company aligned with principles instead of ego. Thinking that maybe justice looked less like revenge and more like creating space for people to become better versions of themselves, while holding them accountable for the damage they'd caused along the way.
That maybe success looked less like triumph and more like consistent choices that accumulated into transformation over time. The balance was delicate and imperfect and absolutely necessary. Morning would come early, bringing federal prosecutors and sustainable fashion initiatives and third-grade science fair projects, bringing the ongoing work of building something meaningful from the wreckage of what hadn't been, bringing Maya's questions and Victoria's tentative growth, and the regular rhythm of a life lived with intention rather than reaction. But tonight, in this moment, Marcus Webb slept soundly in his $800 apartment, with his daughter safe in the next room, and a company thriving under leadership that valued substance over flash. And that was bigger than the sky.